And sometimes we don't act because we have to have prayer meetings about it. We have to have fasting about it. We have to have committees about it. We have to have meetings about it. We have to have deliberations about it. And then before too long, it's over and you've missed the opportunity and someone else has rebuilt the city. So, or not. And so, yes, it's a quick prayer and then immediate action. And so there's only 4. I'm just going to want to cover the first one today, but the 4 are beyond church leadership culture. Number 1 has a bias toward action. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. Number 2, our leadership culture leads from the inside out. I'll talk about that next week. And then in the subsequent weeks, I'll talk about our leadership culture is one that's spirit-led. And then finally, beyond church leadership culture is rested leadership. And I'll talk about that on the final week. So the first thought I wanted to bring was around that idea of our church leadership culture being one that has a bias toward action. And I want to read from Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1-4. And I mean, I love the story of Nehemiah. It's one of my favorite Bible stories. So it's from Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. It says, early in the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, or Artaxerxes, however you want to pronounce that, I was serving the king, Nehemiah. I had never before appeared sad in his presence, because Nehemiah had just previously to this heard from his fellow Israelites that the Jerusalem was in ruins. And so he was despondent about that. And so the king asked him, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me, is the king saying to him. You must be deeply troubled. And so Nehemiah, it says, was terrified. But I replied, and this is where you need to underline, but I replied, Nehemiah, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. And the king asked, well, how can I help you? And so with a prayer to God of heaven, it's again, underline this, Nehemiah replied, he said, if it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. And so what I love about this story is that Nehemiah had received some pretty upsetting news, was discouraged about his hometown, wanted to do something about it, and was almost like just incidentally presented with an opportunity. It wasn't like he had a strategy mapped out, a plan ready to go. He hadn't written down the 5 steps to rebuild the city. He was serving the king wine, going about his regular business, and the king said, hey, what's up? How can I help you? And so immediately Nehemiah had an answer. He had a bias toward action. He wasn't willing to just wonder, wait, ponder, say, I'll get back to you later. He was like, okay. And so what I read in this story is that a bias toward action is in leadership is an intentional inclination to take decisive steps to make proactive choices rather than being passive or indecisive. And it is often easy to be indecisive in leadership because there are so many things to consider, and there would have been so many things for Nehemiah to consider. But despite all those considerations that would have been swirling around in his head, he had a bias toward, well, let's do something about it. And so there was this sense of urgency, this willingness to take action, willingness to take a risk. I mean, even suggesting this to the king, well, this king is actually not of the nation of Judah. This is just an opposing king of another nation. And so Nehemiah took a huge risk to say, I want to go home and rebuild the walls of my city. And so what I see in this principle is that it should encourage us as leaders to overcome what I've heard other leaders phrase, what's called the analysis paralysis, like that, and embrace the mindset of progress. Like there's something that we can do if we just say yes and have a bias toward action. And so, yeah, I just think that Nehemiah story is an excellent illustration of what it is to be the kind of leader that has a bias toward action. So he was the cupbearer of the king. He learned about the desolation of Jerusalem, broken walls. And so instead of being, and sometimes as leaders, we can be overwhelmed, and that can make us balk at moving forward because there's too much to consider. But he wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't immobilized. He took action. He took an opportunity when it presented itself. He took a big risk. He also said a prayer, quick one, right? He's got the king's wine in hand, and the king says, what's up? And so he throws a quick prayer to heaven. God, I need you right now. I'm going to do something pretty risky. And sometimes we don't act because we have to have prayer meetings about it. We have to have fasting about it. And we have to have committees about it. We have to have meetings about it. We have to have deliberations about it. And then before too long, it's over and you've missed the opportunity and someone else has rebuilt the city. So, or not. And so, yes, it's a quick prayer and then immediate action. So 3 quick things. He took guidance through prayer. That's the first thing he did. And I would suggest that for you as leaders, as we are leaders with a bias toward action, is not to act independently from God, to still go to God first and say, hey, God, I'm going to do something here that is, I know what you want, but I'm going to need your help with what to say, with how to move forward. But I'm not going to just wait around. I'm going to do something. So we seek God in prayer, recognizing that we need his help and his wisdom. Secondly, you do still plan. Like, it wasn't like Nehemiah just decided just to, fly by the seat of his pants. He still had a plan. And he may have even had something sketched out in his mind before the king asked, because he'd been thinking about it and ruminating on and he was discouraged about the city being desolated. So maybe he had something in mind and he was able to say to the king, hey, and if you read further on, he does actually say, I'm going to need, these supplies. I'm going to need to write a passage. I need you to give me permission to travel through these other countries to get to Judah and all that sort of stuff. So he had some idea of what he wanted to do first, but he didn't let the lack of detail stop him from asking the question. So he's proactive. And then finally, he was able to use that momentum of making that quick decision to ask the king for help to rally the people around him. And then if you read a little further on, he goes to his other countrymen and he says, hey, the king's allowing me to come back to Judah. I'm going to rebuild the city. I need your help. Can you get together with me and do this? And he enlisted the help of his other countrymen to rebuild the city. So we see in that story, what I can see is the Beyond Church leadership culture of a bias toward action, taking some bold steps, making some timely decisions, making some positive change, accomplishing significant goals, and without even really knowing what's ahead, still doing something about it, still going for it. And like I said, this is affirmation. And, I just see that in you already. I see that you are the kind of leaders who are proactive. You're willing to do something instead of just sitting around on your hands. And I had a conversation with one of our leaders today, and I said to her what a leader said to me many years ago, that I would much rather tame a wild horse than flog a dead one. And I'd much rather have a leadership conversation about a mistake that was made because of a big risk taken than a leadership conversation about an apathetic leader that needs to be moved along and motivated. So you guys are great at that. So that's my thought. That's the first of the 4, and I'll share the other 3 over the next few weeks. But let's be the kind of leaders that have a bias toward action, and be willing to take a risk even if we don't know the full scope of what's ahead. And in fact, if you read that story a little further on, when Nehemiah goes back to Judah to explore the city, I kind of get the feeling that, and if you read it, I think if you read between the lines, it was more than he expected. It was going to be a bigger task than first thought, because he rides his donkey through the city, and the donkey can't actually survey the entire city because the rubble is so vast. And so the Bible says that the donkey can't actually survey the entire land because of how much how destroyed it's been. And so I think he would have gotten there and thought, oh, wow, what have I gotten myself into? But I just think that's how we should live. We should be the kind of people that are always saying, oh, wow, what have I gotten myself into? Instead of being the kind of people that say, oh, wow, look at what they have done. Look at what they've accomplished. Because they're the ones who have been riding their donkey and saying, oh, no, what have I gotten myself in for? Bias toward action. So, let's be the leaders that are like that.